Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. My name is Monique DiGiorgio, and I'm with Western Landowners Alliance. We're just going to wait about a minute or two and let everybody log in. We have a couple hundred people registered, actually about 340. So it'll probably take a minute or so for folks to log in. And while we're waiting, I just want to let you know, and you'll see up on your screen here, that Western Landowners Alliance is a membership organization. And so by signing up for this webinar, you automatically became a member. And actually it's free, so there's no barriers to entry, which we love. And we do rely on support from members just like you. So consider providing a donation. There's a QR code on the screen there that Danny has put up on the slide. And then Morgan is going to be in charge of the chat function today, and she's going to be putting all kinds of resources in there for you, one of which is our website and more information about Western Landowners Alliance and more information about becoming a member, opportunities to donate and support our mission and work. So thank you so much. Again, we'll just wait. We're at about 100 participants, which is exciting. And we'll just give it another 20, 30 seconds or a minute or so to let everybody log on. Thanks, everybody. Welcome to our winter webinar. We'll get started in just a moment here. And for anyone that comes in late, or for those that couldn't make it, or for those of you that want to share this webinar with your colleagues, we are going to be sending the recording along with quite a few resources that you'll find all in the chat, but we'll be bundling that all up and sending it to you via email about a week after today, or maybe even early to mid next week. And you can share that with colleagues, watch it again, and look at the resources. So don't feel like you need to be taking mad notes. We'll make sure we get everything to you so that you have it as a resource. We are at about 117 participants, so I'm just going to wait one more minute. We are going till 1 p.m. today, and we're going to promptly end at 1 p.m. And so we'll probably get going here soon just to respect everybody's time and make sure we get out of here on time. So yeah, thanks again, everybody. My name is Monique DiGiorgio. I am the Water Program Director for Western Landowners Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us in our winter webinar series today. We are recording this session, and we are really excited for this particular webinar. It's the third in the series. Is Use It or Lose It an Absolute? Historical consumptive use in Colorado and understanding your water rights. Our previous webinars were rancher innovations to support soil health and water management amidst a changing climate, and low-tech stream restoration for landowners, the benefits, water right issues, and reducing risks. We had about 500 people sign up for those last two webinars. They can all be found on our Water in the West page that Morgan is going to put in the chat here. You can watch those and look at the resources from those previous two webinars, and we're going to do the same today. And I'd like to introduce the rest of the Western Landowners Alliance staff, because we could not put this on without their help. Louis Wirtz is our communications director. He's waving right now. He's from Denver, Colorado. Danny Howlett is our membership and outreach coordinator. She's in Montana. Morgan Wagner is our stewardship coordinator. She's down here in Durango with myself. We're both located in Southwest Colorado. So thanks to all the staff and Western Landowners Alliance for hosting us today. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to Western Landowners Alliance, who we are, what we do, and then we're going to get right into the presentation today. We have two incredible speakers. Western Landowners Alliance mission is to advance policies and practices that sustain working lands, connected landscapes, and native species. It's a really unique and powerful mission. We are landowner-led. We're a nonprofit organization. We work across the West on a variety of issues, from predator conflict reduction to working wildlands to supporting the agricultural economy, and now water, which is somewhat of a newer issue for us in the last 2 or 3 months. We're actually building our water program here in the Colorado River Basin, specifically working in the upper Colorado River Basin. And we're working to hear from landowners like yourselves, your thoughts, concerns, interests in water, given the current crisis that we're in here in the Colorado River Basin. So we're here to support you. In fact, Morgan, as our stewardship coordinator, is here to work on bringing all that funding that's coming in at the federal level to landowners on the ground. So please feel free to reach out to us during or after this webinar, and we will tell you more about what we're here to do. And we believe at Western Landowners Alliance that private land stewards like Bill, who's joining us today, play a critical role in land and water conservation, and we're here to support them. So we're really excited that you're joining us today. We had about 350 registrants from 18 states, about 3/4 of you self-identified as landowners, and we really appreciate you being here. Since this is an informational webinar and all of your lovely faces are not here on Zoom, we kind of wish that they were so we could get to know you, but it's a lot of people. We'd love for you to put your name and affiliation in the chat, and then that way you can see who else is here and get to know your colleagues and other peers on the webinar. The way today is going to work is we're going to have Greg and then Bill speak. We're going to use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask questions. So as soon as you hear something that the speakers are talking about, just go ahead and throw that question in the Q&A function. We'll get to those in the last 15 minutes of the webinar. And so now, hopefully I've not forgotten anything, and it's my pleasure to introduce Greg Peterson and Bill Fales. Greg Peterson grew up in Littleton, Colorado, where he still lives after living around the world. He studied history and political economy. He has served as the executive director of the Colorado Ag Water Alliance for the last 7 years. The past few years, Greg has been knee-deep in farmers and ranchers, learning more about water, agriculture, Colorado, and the digestive habitats of cattle than he thought was possible. He spends his free time growing vegetables on his small truck farm, learning to hate hail and bindweed. And I'm right there with you, Greg. Bindweed is absolutely my nemesis. We could talk about that for hours. Bill Fales is here today. It's my pleasure to introduce him. He's with Cold Mountain Ranch, which is a conserved cow-calf operation near Carbondale, Colorado, along the Crystal River. Bill and his wife, Marj Perry, entered into agreement with the Colorado Water Trust to reduce diversions from the Helms Ditch when the Crystal River needs water, while still harvesting their hay crops. Instead of reducing their total annual water use, like with most agricultural conservation programs, Fales was able to shift the timing of his diversion to align with the Crystal River's needs, maintaining his agricultural water rights, thanks to a bill passed by the Colorado State Legislature in 2013 that provides safe harbor for water right owners. So please join me in welcoming both Greg and Bill. Thanks so much for being here, and we're going to start with Greg today.
All right. Well, thank you so much for giving me the chance to speak. I'm Greg Peterson. I'm with the Colorado Ag Water Alliance, and we're an association of agricultural organizations throughout the state of Colorado, and our goal is to support and preserve irrigated agriculture. And we don't have individual members; we have member organizations, and I just want to mention a few of those that have a real key role in being a part of this organization. I mean, you have Colorado Fruit and Vegetable Growers, Colorado Potato Administrative Committee, Wheat Growers, Colorado Livestock Association, Farm Bureau, Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, Colorado Cattlemen's, Colorado Pork Producers, Colorado Dairy, and they've been huge part of this organization and really appreciate all of their support. So I was asked to speak about water law. And I think I'm going to disappoint you. I'm not an attorney. And so you're like, well, why'd they invite this guy to talk? And I'm going to talk about use it or lose it and historical consumptive use, which I know are two issues that I get a lot of questions about from landowners throughout the state of Colorado. And I understand that we're going to have quite a few people from other states. And I'll be honest, if you start asking me water law questions outside of the state of Colorado, I'm not going to be of much help to you. But I still hope that you're going to get something out of this. And in general, these are two issues you can't learn enough about. And I've I'm trying to get better at how to communicate these because I think you have to hear what things 5 different ways and sometimes 5 or 10 times for it to really make an impact and understand. And these are complex issues. So let me share my screen and I'm going to just get started. And perfect. So you can check out our website, coagwater.org. We do quite a bit around the state just with writing grants, outreach. We have a lot of grant projects related to drought, water quality that we're doing, working with farmers and ranchers in pretty much every basin in Colorado. So I wanted to say just how some of you might be really interested in learning more about water law and where do you even start? And it is pretty intimidating. I mean, I've been doing this 8 years now, and I'm finally understanding a few things. It's going to be a lifetime to really and I really there's a lot of great sources out there. This at least from the community in Colorado, there are amazing resources, whether it's attorneys, engineers, and especially farmers and ranchers. I mean, everything I've learned has come from asking questions of these people, and there's a lot of great experts out there. And I really encourage you to talk to them and learn from them and understand what they've been involved with, especially, I mean, people who have been on boards of conservancy districts and ditch companies for years. They have a wealth of knowledge, and you should really be reaching out to them. And I've been very fortunate that when I have questions, people are more than happy to give me answers. That's been wonderful. And you can't, I wanted to say that water law, when you start talking about certain issues, you can get down rabbit holes and specific topics that are relevant to this one basin or this one water right. Oh, and that's great, but you can't spend too much time learning the basics. And I mean, if you really have a great understanding of change cases, historical consumptive use, augmentation, and just administration, I mean, that can really go a long way. And that's what I really just spend a lot of my time is learning and relearning and seeing how the basics apply in different places throughout the state of Colorado. So I wanted to just highlight a few sources that you might want to look into that could be helpful for you. Colorado Water Law for Non-Lawyers by Andy Jones and Tom Check is kind of I think it's such a great book. It is for non-lawyers, and they do a great job. I use it a lot. Mine has got notes everywhere. It's got tags everywhere throughout it. It's a really helpful source. Kind of just go back to it pretty often when I need to clarify issues. I put in this other book just because if water law is something new and intimidating for you to understand, I felt like this is a great story. Tertia Delgin, she wrote this. She's not an attorney, doesn't have experience with water law. She comes from a farm in northeastern Colorado, and her father was involved in a group called the Groundwater Appropriators of the South Platte, or GASP. And back in the early 2000s, they were having quite a significant water issue, and they didn't understand what was going on. And I thought it's a great book because here is a non-water person trying to understand water law and how it works in Colorado. And she's an author. And I actually forced my book club to read this. And these are people who at first they really groaned, but afterwards they can all tell you what an augmentation plan is. And these are normal non-water people. And I was impressed with that. University of Denver, the Stern College Water Law Review, that can get into some really specific subjects, but there's some great resources there. And then Water Education Colorado, they have their citizens guides, and you can look at those online. You have like groundwater, you have administration, conservation, efficiency. I think one of the best ones that I still use often is they have one just on all the compacts we have. And that's another, just understanding having a good grasp of how the different compacts work or the compact in your basin works can be really helpful. So we're going to talk, I'm going to spend a lot of time mainly talking about use it or lose it at first. We're going to then go into historical consumptive use and then back to different applications of conservation and efficiency and what that does. And I mean, there are some common misunderstandings of the term use it or lose it. And you tend to, in a lot of places, you have the belief that diverting the absolute maximum amount of water that you can divert is in your best interest, and it'll preserve the amount of water, your water right, or protect you for something down the road. And on the other end is that, well, reducing the amount of diversion for conservation or efficiency, that can really risk part of your water right. And there isn't a clear yes or no on this. And so just for that first part is that yes, I mean, that first belief that, okay, you maximize what you're diverting, is that really going to preserve your water right? And no, it won't. And we're going to dig into that a bit. And then, well, reducing your diversion for conservation of efficiency, will that risk your water right? False-ish, is in general no, but we need to talk a bit more that, yeah, that could in some circumstances impact you. And we'll discuss that. So the true measure of your water right is the historical beneficial consumptive use. I mean, that's what I think, having a good understanding of what is your consumptive use. And in irrigated agriculture, we'll use these two terms, your HCU, your historical consumptive use, or your CU, your consumptive use. And when we talk about what is the beneficial use, what is the value of it, if you go to a change case, you go through water court, you participate in a conservation program, that is really what we're talking about with these. And in the case of an irrigation right, this is the documented annual crop evapotranspiration, or just the ET. And that isn't always the easiest to figure out, but that's when we're talking about the value of your water right, that is what we're discussing. And so when we talk about a consumptive use analysis, and you're not going to do this isn't something you do all the time. I mean, if you go into water court, you are going to go into a consumptive use analysis. If you participate in a program like system conservation pilotship program, they're going to do a consumptive use analysis. So there's certain triggers for that. And I know that I think we've got the chat function open right now, and I'd just be curious if people could just put in there, what do you think goes into an agricultural consumptive use analysis? And just so you're aware, I used to be a teacher, so I can just wait patiently until everybody just answers. Have any ideas of what goes into an agricultural consumptive use analysis? Crop type, irrigated acreage, water used to produce an ag commodity, evapotranspiration, crop type, rotation water right, measurement box data. Okay, we're getting a lot of good answers here. Satellite images, point of diversion. All right. So in general, they're even going to go through not just like your water court decrees, your water right, proof of ownership, diversion records, irrigated acreage through time, representative climate data, the closest they can find to where your field is that we're looking at, soil information, often using the NRCS's web soil survey, your irrigation method, your crop type. I think, for example, just like with the water court decrees, recently just a well down in the southern part of the state where they were moving their well just less than 200 feet, which you can normally do, But in doing that, it opened themselves up and started looking into this where they were using that well to irrigate 2 fields. And when you really looked, and they'd been doing that for about 40 years. And when they looked into their decree, sure enough, when it said the area, the irrigated acreage, it was about half of what they've been irrigating. That really they should have only been irrigating 1 well, and that really opened them up. And now they're looking at about $30,000 in attorney's fees in water court. And so that is something, I mean, they're going to look and scrutinize those original decrees to make sure that you are acting within those. And with the irrigation, this is something that's going to be pretty significant. And this is going to be different. This is from the NRCS of different irrigation efficiencies. This will be different in every state, and often in some basins, you'll have an agreed upon value of what is that efficiency. And it can even be very site specific if they've got enough examples. And that these are what we use to determine that. And like I said, it can be different depending on the basin. For instance, in the Arkansas Basin in Colorado, a lot of our irrigation efficiencies, when you're improving efficiencies, we've had to have those are agreed upon values with the state of Kansas. And for example, if you're putting in subsurface drip irrigation, according to that agreement, that's supposedly 100% consumptive and efficient, which the good whether or not it is, but that's so it can change based on the area. But these are some general values that you're going to be seeing used in that consumptive use analysis. And like you mentioned, but you said the amount you divert isn't important. And in that list 2 slides back, I had your diversion record. So how does that fit into here? And well, often, I mean, the consumptive use, it only takes into account what was actually consumed. And so what if you have a junior water right? And I mean, every year your hay, your alfalfa, your corn can consume this much, but some years you only get that much water. Some years you get this much water. Well, that's what the diversion records play a real role in this, and tells them is, well, you're not going to get counted for water for consumptive use when it wasn't even there. And yes, you're going to have dry years. And when you go through a consumptive use analysis, you tend to do 20, 30 years, and you average out the dry and the wet years. But this is really more relevant if you're consistently if you're not even diverting the amount of water that your crop can consume. And so that's where those diversion records play a really big role in this, to see if you can even meet the consumptive use of the crop. So I just wanted to do an example here to try to explain all these different parts of what we're talking about, and really what number are we getting at when we talk about the value and the historical consumptive use of your water right. So here we've got a 50-acre hayfield, and you've got your diversion, and over a season you divert 424 acre feet. And you've got your ditch. And this ditch, only 15% ditch loss, I'd say that's great in my experience. And so from that, you're going to lose about 64 acre feet. And the rest will make it to your field. Now, on this field, and in quite a few places, we're only going to, and I've seen, I mean, we've got 30% irrigation efficiency. Maybe you've got just a few, I mean, maybe a foot of soil and then a lot of cobble underneath. But we've got a lot of places like that on the western slope. And so your irrigation efficiency is real. We're looking at really only 108 acre feet of that 30%. And then what else is happening with all this, the rest of that water that's going on that field in this analysis? Well, I mean, you've got surface runoff that's coming off on the edge of the field and going back to the river. You have deep percolation that's seeping through the soil profile, making it back to the river. And then we also are going to have to, off that irrigation efficiency, we're probably going to lose some to evaporation. And then at the end of this, really, we're talking about a much smaller number of, you were looking at that 424 acre feet as your water right. And it's like, no, your consumptive use, the value of your water right, what your crop is consuming is 97 acre feet. And so, for example, if this water right was being purchased and transferred to municipal use, that municipal water user isn't getting 424 acre feet. They're getting 97 acre feet, and which is just about under 2 acre feet per acre. So, which is about not pretty common from what I've seen. And so I think that's important to understand, is that in these irrigation systems, there's a lot of different fractions of water, whether it's the surface runoff, the evaporation, the ditch losses, the deep percolation, and that this is how we determine, and how the state engineers determine what is your consumptive use and what that value of your water right really is. And for example, if you participate in a conservation program like the system conservation program, really they're not looking at the 424 acre feet. It's that 97 is actually what you are consuming and taking out of the system. And so there's a lot of concern with losing it, as in your water right. And I wanted to touch on that a bit, of how do you actually lose it? And again, this is very Colorado focused. And it's a lot more difficult than you'd think. And there's some hard and fast ways to really protect your water right, but then there's also some more newer issues that we're running into where you might be losing parts of it. So a water right in the state of Colorado, it can be determined to be abandoned due to non-use for a long period of time. 10 years or more, it generally is how it works in here, but only if there's intent to abandon. So every 10 years in the state of Colorado, the Division of Water Resources, they compile a list of all their water rights. And in the past, they used to do it word of mouth, on paper. I think this past year was the first time they actually did it from the computer, from the documents, and downloaded all of that. And they look at, okay, where are all the zeros? Who's not diverting? Which water rights are showing no diversion records? That's their first clue of zeroing in on what's abandoned. But really, there has to be proof that there is intent. So for example, if, let's say, your ditch, you have an issue with CDOT, Colorado Department of Transportation, and they've been building a road and they took out the culvert for your ditch, and you were in a long, protracted argument over years with them. If that isn't intent to abandon, if you can demonstrate that you're trying to solve this issue, I mean, and so it's a lot more difficult to actually show that intent to abandonment. And so we'll talk about that a bit. But in general, I mean, how do you prevent abandonment? And I should just divert as much as I can. Not necessarily, because again, it's you diverting more water isn't necessarily going to affect your consumptive use. And if anything, in some basins in Colorado, it can be legally determined that that is waste. There is usually a duty of water, of how much water it is agreed upon that it takes per acre, including what it takes in transit losses to get there. And if you're applying too much water, more than you beneficially need, then yes, and especially if there's a ditch right downstream to you before that water gets back to the system, and it will get back to the system. But if there's another water user who could be using that, that's where the state might get involved and say, nope, yeah, you need to tighten things up here. A measuring device. That is the best way to save yourself in preventing abandonment, because that is proof that you are actually, that is the best source of evidence to prove that you are diverting water. In some places, we don't have measuring devices. And like I said, when the Division of Water Resources is looking up who is not using their water right, that is the easiest signal for them of, okay, we have a bunch of zeros here. And maybe you've been using it for 40 years, and you can put in testimony and put in evidence of that and prevent your water right from being abandoned. It'll take time. It may take money. But the safest way is a measuring device. And showing why you're not, if you have a water right that you're not able to use, showing why. So the example with working with, like, you have a culvert that needs to be fixed, or some other infrastructure that's preventing you from using that water right, and correspondence, or just showing here's an engineering study and we're trying to get the money together. Those are clear ways that you can demonstrate that you're working on this. And the state of Colorado, it can be really sympathetic to that, because again, they have to prove that there is intent to abandon. I mean, just to show you how at times how easy it can be to protect your water right. There are I know some large ranches in Colorado that aren't used for agricultural production, and they have irrigation water rights, and they have storage water rights. And really, they're not, maybe once a year, or at least once every few years, they open everything up, irrigate everything, use their water right, put it to beneficial use, and that's enough to protect their water right. There's one ranch I'm aware of, they do it once every 10 years. That's all they have to do. And it's a recreational ranch, not in ag production. And that is enough to protect their water right, is just to put it to beneficial use once every 10 years. Again, if they ever went to sell that water right, in a change case, boy, oh yeah, their consumptive use would be severely impacted, but they are protecting it from abandonment. Great. So there are, though, it's good, we talked a little bit about, well, what can affect your water right? And there are real actions that can, and it's important to be aware of these, and these can affect it for better or worse. Because it's not necessarily the diversion of your water right, it's that consumptive use. And probably the most common that often we're doing, and throughout if the life of a farm or ranch, is our crop type. And you might be changing that crop type for any number of reasons. And if you, for example, are growing small grains and you start growing alfalfa, and you're still operating within your decree, you're still diverting, you're not diverting more water, but chances are you might be consuming more water. And on the other end, if you were growing alfalfa and you plant oats, I mean, you are going to be consuming less water. And when they are calculating that historical consumptive use, it will inevitably be smaller. And that it puts you in, it's this odd catch-22. It's trade-offs of that might be a great business decision for you to do that. And if you're really focused on the longevity of your farm or ranch, if you're looking at going to water court for any number of reasons, I mean, you're going to get a bit shaved off the top of that. Acreage size, another significant one. I mean, if your decree will tell you how many acres you can irrigate within that. And if you use less acres, that will affect your consumptive use. In the state of Colorado, if you go beyond that acreage, we call that water spreading, and that is not legal in the state of Colorado. And like that example with the well that I gave you, if you've been doing water spreading, I don't care if you've been doing it 5 years, 10 years, 40 years, if you're irrigating more water than more land than what is stipulated in your decree, it doesn't count at all for your consumptive use. And you might get your hand slapped for that. So what we'll get into, and this will get into what Bill is here to talk about more, is well, first, efficiency is what happens if I increase the efficiency of my irrigation system, but then also what if you get involved in a conservation project. And I get a couple things happen when you increase the efficiency. Is likely you're going to increase the consumptive use. You switch from flood to sprinkler, your yields are likely going to increase. And Same thing, your consumptive use will increase. The value essentially of your beneficial use will increase. But often though, you might be diverting less now. You need less push water. You need less carriage water. And that's something we've been seeing throughout the state happening. And that can lead to some interesting issues where what the state has determined that if you have a long-term record of reduced diversions, that they consider that the permanent character of the water right. And so there's a chance that, let's say you're only diverting 80% of your water right because you're all in sprinkler irrigation now, and you go to water court, there is the chance, and this is where I'm giving you not a clear answer here, but that they could lop off that 20%. Very possible. And right now in Colorado, in northwestern part of the state, in the Yampa, the White, and the Green Rivers, I mean, this last round of abandonment, the issue of partial abandonment was brought up. And that is that is something that can, and I wouldn't be surprised that if it happened to you, if you do put in, if you increase your efficiency, you at the same time of increasing your consumptive use, you might be risking a part of your water right of your diversion, and that could be ratcheted down. And then, so then on the other end, and this is what Bill will talk about, and I'll be wrapping up pretty quickly, is just conservation. What about conservation? And how does that affect that? And like taking land out of production, fallowing a field temporarily, removing the end guns off a sprinkler, switching to a less consumptive crop. And again, when your consumptive use is going down, this can be considered the permanent character of the water right. You are affecting that consumptive use when they do that analysis. And so that is and again, this could be a great business decision for you. If you're going to water court, though, bear in mind that could negatively impact what you think is how much water you are consuming. However, we have a lot of tools in the state of Colorado. We have Senate Bill 13, and it protects an owner enrolled in a state or federal conservation program. That's for really the Gunnison, the Colorado, the White, the Green, and the Yampa rivers. And you can use that for 5 out of 10 years. And so let's say you participate in a program where you lease all of your water, and you did that in 2023, and you have a 0 on your diversion record. Well, actually, if you're in one of these programs, that 0 is ignored for a historical consumptive use analysis, and it can be ignored for a number of years. And we can actually often renew that 10 years up to 30 years now. And then we also have administrative approvals that can be granted for fallowing and leasing projects, temporary in-stream flows, rotational crop management, substitute water supply. And so there are tools that we can use. It's just, if you did some conservation activity on your farm or ranch, and you're just like, well, I did this. Well, that's not enough. It needs to be in one of these state, federal programs in order to have these kinds of protections, because you will be reducing your consumptive use. And I think Bill will be touching on that. So I'm going to stop right there. And I think.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you so much, Greg. And I have my copy of Colorado water law here, though it's not as earmarked as yours. Hopefully it will be soon. Well, it's my pleasure to pass it on to Bill to share his story. Take it away, Bill.
Okay. Thank you very much. So this is where those are actually my cows in my pasture. We'll ignore the article on page 8. That's not the very fun part, but it just shows how spectacular this valley is, which is a blessing and a curse. But my wife and I and our 2 daughters and their families run this ranch. Part of it was actually her grandfather acquired 100 years ago. So we're now a centennial ranch, I guess. We haven't applied for that, but we are. But the town of Carbondale is exploding in growth because it is such a spectacular, nice place. And it's a really incredible place. And so that has brought a lot of new people to the valley, and a lot of them have come here for the scenery, for the environment, for the recreation opportunities that exist. So we have a lot more people paying attention to the river than we were used to. And things really came to a head in the drought of 2018. It was pretty significant. And it was actually the first time we had a call on the river from this river. We have sometimes been called from way downstream in Cameo by Grand Junction, will call for those huge rights down there. But there had never been a call by a Crystal River ditch on other Crystal River ditches. We'd always just worked among ourselves. So I like this picture. It has better grass than the first picture. But again, that's our operation. And you can see why people want to live here. It's really good. So when that call was placed on the river in 2018, boy, it was kicking a hornet's nest, because not only did it curtail a few other agricultural ditches, it also turned out the town of Marble was taking water out of the river without a good water right. Some of Carbondale's water rights were out of priority. There were something like 62 houses between Marble and Carbondale that had non-exempt wells, and no augmentation plans in place. And so, boy, did everyone get excited. Those houses in 2018, no houses got shut off because the district engineer did not want to go there, but that's what the river looked like. But he did prohibit all outdoor use in the houses and town of Marble because they were out of priority. Colorado water law, as I understand it, and like Greg, I'm unencumbered by a legal education. To place a call on the river, you have to, what is so-called, sweep the river. You can't just be lazy and say, I don't have enough water in my ditch, and have this guy, a junior right upstream, shut down. You actually have to sweep the river, which is what has happened here. And in 2018, our water commissioner actually called me up correctly and said, I think there's about a foot of water, 1 cubic foot per second, going through your side of the push-up dam. Do you think you could plug that up a little bit better? I hate to shut down these junior rights more than I need to. But that's how extreme it was. They were fussing over the last foot of water in the river. And I didn't like that. No one liked that. As I said, all the new residents in Carbondale who are paying attention to the environment weren't very happy. The fish were really unhappy. It just is not a good situation. So I think I give credit to the Colorado Water Trust. I think they were largely responsible for convening a lot of community meetings over what we could do to protect the health of the Crystal River. And we had a lot of meetings and an awful lot of scientific research done is on the river. And the downstream, the Crystal River actually has 100 cubic foot per second in-stream water right. Of course, it has a 1971 priority date, so it isn't much use when all our ditches, most of them are before the turn of the before 1900 or shortly thereafter, a 1971 right doesn't get you much. But we said, well, how did at that time Division of Wildlife come up with 100 cubic feet per second? Was that just throwing a dart at a dartboard, or was there some real research? And we couldn't find any research that was done. And so the company in town, Lotic Hydrologic, was contracted to study the river and to come up with a good number of what the health of this river needs in terms of flow. And they came up with a number that, kind of 40 to 60 cubic feet per second is a real sweet spot. Above 60, it's not ideal, but everything's probably surviving well. Below 40, things are really in trouble. And so the Water Trust, Colorado Water Trust, came to the agricultural irrigators in the valley and said, we'd like to make a deal with you that when the river is looking like this, awful, we'd like to make a deal and actually pay you to non-divert. And they didn't get any response, really. No one wanted to work with them. And Marj and I felt, well, gosh, we bet we could work with them, but not on the terms that they were talking about at that time, because at that time, they wanted us to sign up in early spring, in February or March, and say, yeah, if the river goes down in the late summer, we'll shut our ditch down. But we just were not comfortable in doing that, because we had no idea what May and June would be like, if it would be a hot blast furnace or a nice cold, wet, rainy spring, and we would have a great hay crop or we'd have a terrible hay crop. And so we talked to the Water Trust and said, we'd like to work with you, but we have some different terms and we're being first talked about. So with that, we came up with a deal, and the Water Trust was great for us to work with. They were really responsive to our concerns. And we said, we can't tell you in the early spring if we'd be happy shutting off the ditch or not. But after we get up our first cutting of hay and we have a sense of how the summer's going, yeah, we could. And so we came up with an agreement that totally in our discretion, which is what's important to us, if the river flow is within some parameters, if it's it has to be less than 40 cubic feet per second flowing in the river, and more than, I can't remember, maybe 10, because they figured if it was already that low, a little bit more water wasn't going to be sufficient to restore health to the river. And so we said, yeah, if those parameters are met, if we're below 40 but above 10 or 15 or whatever that number is, then you pay us, we will turn our ditch off and let that water go back to the river. And they were very happy to do that and made the deal with us. We've actually only instituted it one time right here, because after 2018, I think we took a while to get the deal actually done. In 2020, maybe, was a great year, and I may have the dates wrong, but the river didn't drop below 40 CSS. The next year was really bad. It was really bad, and I didn't feel I had enough hay put up or pastures where I could afford to turn the ditch off, and so I didn't. But finally in 2022, I think this picture is, the parameters were met. my bank account was fuller than normal or emptier than normal, and my stack yards were fuller than normal. So I said, yeah, we'll shut the head gate off, and which is what this picture shows, and turn the water back through the spillway at our head gate back to the river. And so that water went back into the river. How much that this ditch is only adjudicated for 6 cubic feet per second. So I'm not sure myself how much that helped. Hopefully a lot. What we were hoping for was to get more people involved, more irrigators involved, because I thought that if we could show them that we got a check and they could see that it's a lot more fun signing the back of the check than the front, more people would get involved. Yet we haven't, but I'll quit because we're running out of time. So open it up for discussions.
Bill, thank you so much for that. And I put that amazing video of you and Marj done by the Colorado Cattlemen Agricultural Land Trust in the chat here, because it's just a lovely video and people can get to know more about you and Cold Mountain Ranch. And we appreciate the details of that story, in particular, how the nuances of that particular year allowed you to act on the agreement that you had with the Water Trust. So we just have 9 minutes left. We only have a few questions in the chat. So we're going to ask the first 2 that came in here. So Benji has a question for Greg. How do you calculate consumptive water when factoring in the acre feet lost through ditch, evaporation, percolation, runoff, etc.?
Yeah, Benji. So I touched on that just a little bit, but so a few more, at least in Colorado, we often it's modeling. I mean, we have what we call state CU and state mod. They do consumptive use analysis to be and those are used, and there's a lot of assumptions that are put into those in terms of what's the efficiency of a certain type of soil and local climate data, and then what they use in that historical consumptive use analysis. It's called the Blaney-Criddle method. It's widely accepted by a lot of water courts in Colorado to find the ET. And that can feel like, boy, I mean, I don't know anything about modeling. You don't want me running a computer model. And that's where the more data and documentation you as an irrigator have, that is valuable. Yield data, water applied. I mean, if you keep your own like precipitation data, that's something that you can really help contribute to that process, because there are a lot of assumptions that go into it.
Thank you so much. And Bill, I have a burning question for you, because I know we're running out of time here at the end, but Greg mentioned Senate Bill 1319 as a way that allows landowners to protect their water right when they're entering into conservation agreement. Was this something that you were able to utilize at Cold Mountain Ranch? Can you help us understand the process that allowed you to protect your water rights? And do you feel that they were protected when you entered into this agreement?
Yes, I definitely feel they were protected. No, we, I don't know what the correct term is. I'd say registered or applied to the Colorado River District, which is a government agency, and got their approval. So it was a program under their oversight, perhaps. And so we had that state agency approval of our plan. One of the reasons it took us such a long time to get our deal or agreement with the Water Trust done was the county attorney, because the county is a co-holder of our conservation easement. He was very scared about the deal, perhaps. I don't think he fully understood it at the time. And we first called it a non-diversion agreement, and maybe he was being, I feel he was being a little overly cautious. And so we changed the title of our agreement from a non-diversion agreement to a diversion timing agreement. But I think the important part was that we were registered with the River District and
Thank you.
had we were enrolled with them.
Yes, you're enrolled in the program. Okay, thank you. We have one more question for Greg and one more for Bill, so we can end at 1 o'clock here. So Greg, there's a question from Rio de la Vista. She is wondering if you could address the recent commentary with the bill that's now in the Colorado legislature that minimizes new non-functional turf, that is new lawns that are not walked on or except for being moved. Some people are asking, what about ag water conservation? Seems like it doesn't have to be one or the other, but both over time, and that ag uses water to grow food. So do you have thoughts on that? And hopefully, Rio, I captured that correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Bill over there, he's the bad guy growing food for everybody, is how some people like to think about it. But I mean, I mean, through the past 20 years, you've seen a lot of improvements through agriculture and efficiency, using resources. And really, when we're looking at the next 30 years, the hit's coming to ag. I mean, we're looking at most 20% of irrigated and agriculture in Colorado could be gone. The cities are going to be using more water. We're going to have more in-stream flow rights. The hit's coming. And I guess that's the involuntary conservation is happening. Real conservation in agriculture is hard. I mean, without fallowing, you're talking, you might say 5–10%. And there's a lot of work going on that throughout the state. But really, we're talking about food. And I mean, you talk about conservation in these, Bill and Marj, they're not eating all that beef that they produce. I'm pretty certain they're not. Somebody else is. And we're going to continue to need that.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. We were just at the Colorado Water Congress, and Robert Cicada, who has a farm in Aurora, was saying that he hears and feels that ag has a target on their back. So that kind of really speaks, Greg, to what you were saying. So Bill, we have another question for you. You kind of spoke to this at the end, that one of your hopes was that maybe some of the neighbors and other landowners near you would kind of get on board and work together as a community once you and Marj moved forward. But that hasn't happened so much, it sounds like. And there was a question from Tom, you know, what is your experience with other ag users, and is there, I guess, and I would just add on, are there any other things that you feel like you might do at this point to reach out to your neighbors?
I think probably one of the biggest impediments, it was the subject of Greg's entire talk. I think it was a fear that they might be endangering their water right.
Yes. Yeah. And now that you've been in the program, and I guess you used it that 1 year, and sorry, Bill, what year was that? That was recently, right? But,
yeah, it was, I think it was 2022, not this past year. The river never dropped that low, but I believe it was the year before. And
yeah, I wonder if now that you've had that experience, you know, in time, you may be able to say, hey, you know, we did use the agreement, and we
hope so, and we're still here, but we're in a unique situation 2 ways. One, it was really important. We were the last ditch down the river before our return flows and our subterranean return flows came back and had the river pick up. And so we had the ability to put water in the dry spot. That was one thing that we need. The other is that we did a conservation easement on every acre we own and tied the water to this land. So we're not concerned about our consumptive use. We can't sell our water off the land. We don't want to sell our water off the land. We did put in our easement the ability to loan water to the river, so-called. But, you know, I'm not really concerned about my water right. It's just because we can't sell it. We don't want to sell it.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for sharing your story today. Greg, thanks for all of your insights. And I didn't know you were a teacher. You did a great job with your presentation. Thank you so much. It was super informative. And we are out of time. So I just want to thank all of you for attending today. Just as a reminder, we're going to post this webinar, all the resources in the chat, and also the other 2 webinars that we have. You will get an email in the next 3 to 5 days with all that information. And our last winter webinar is March 1st, Friday. The title is Irrigation Modernization for Ag Producers. We are going to feature the Farmers Conservation Alliance and Simon Martinez with the Ute Mountain Ute Farm and Ranch. So please join us for that. And finally, we want to thank the Gates Family Foundation for their support of this webinar series. The other foundations that have supported our water work more broadly include Conscience Bay Research, the Fund to Protect New Mexico Air, Water, and Federal Public Lands through the Santa Fe Community Foundation, Lore Foundation, and Walton Family Foundation. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your Friday and weekend. See you later.